Have you ever experienced something unexpected that made you question your plans? Maybe you were set on a particular path, but suddenly, something stopped you, a delay, an obstacle, or even someone giving you advice. Sometimes, these interruptions are not accidents, they're God's way of redirecting us to something better. In today's message, we're diving deep into one of the most amusing, yet thought-provoking stories in the Bible, the story of Balaam and his talking donkey. This story is more than a curious moment from the Old Testament, it is a powerful narrative filled with divine intervention, lessons on humility, and, yes, a talking donkey. So let's ask ourselves a few questions. How often are we, like Balaam, blind to the bigger picture because we're so focused on what we want? How far would we go for personal gain? And what does God do when we don't pay attention to His warnings? By the end of this message, you will understand how this ancient story of a donkey, a misguided prophet, and a determined king can offer valuable lessons for your life today. We will learn about the importance of obedience, recognizing divine redirection, and finding joy in the unexpected. Now, let's get started. Part 1, the historical context: a nervous king and a feared nation. Israel's journey to the Promised Land. The story of Balaam and his talking donkey takes place at a significant moment in the history of Israel. The Israelites, after their miraculous deliverance from Egyptian slavery, had been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. This journey was meant to teach them trust, obedience, and reliance on God. And now, at long last, they were nearing the end of this journey. The Israelites were camped on the plains of Moab, just east of the Jordan River, poised to cross over into the land that God had promised them. This wasn't just an ordinary campout, it was a powerful nation, millions strong, led by Moses and guided by God Himself. The land that lay ahead was the culmination of a promise made generations earlier to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Their journey had been filled with challenges and miracles. God had parted the Red Sea, provided manna from heaven, and given them water from a rock. They had seen God's hand in their victories over powerful enemies like Sihon and Og, kings of the Amorites and Bashan. These victories demonstrated not only their growing strength but also God's undeniable favor over them. Moab's fear and King Balak's plan. Imagine being the king of a small nation like Moab, looking out at the vast encampment of Israelites that stretched as far as the eye could see. Balak, the king of Moab, was terrified. He knew that Moab didn't stand a chance against Israel in a traditional battle. The Moabites were not equipped to face such a formidable force, especially one backed by a God who had demonstrated His power time and again. The Bible tells us, Moab was sore afraid of the people, because they were many, and Moab was distressed because of the children of Israel. Numbers chapter 22 verse 3. Balak knew he needed a different strategy, something beyond military power. He needed a spiritual weapon. So, what did Balak decide to do? He decided to hire a prophet, someone who was known for his ability to pronounce blessings and curses that had significant spiritual power. And that's where Balaam comes into the story. Part 2, who was Balaam? A prophet torn between two masters. The mysterious figure of Balaam. Balaam was a curious character in the Bible. He wasn't an Israelite, but he clearly had knowledge of the true God. He was recognized far and wide as a prophet, someone whose words held tremendous power. In those days, blessings and curses were believed to be tangible forces that could influence events, and Balaam had a reputation for being able to channel those forces. Balaam's spiritual connection was genuine. He knew God and communicated with Him. However, Balaam's story reveals a divided heart. He was someone torn between his desire to serve God and his yearning for wealth, honor, and personal gain. This duality makes Balaam both a fascinating and tragic figure. He knew what was right, but the lure of riches clouded his judgment. When Balak's emissaries arrived with promises of rewards, Balaam did what a prophet should do: he consulted God. And God's answer was clear: "Thou shalt not go with them, thou shalt not curse the people, for they are blessed." Numbers chapter 22 verse 12. It was a definitive answer. God had blessed Israel, and no curse from Balaam or anyone else could change that. So, Balaam sent the messengers back to King Balak, refusing the offer. Balak's persistence and Balaam's weakness. But Balak wasn't about to give up so easily. He thought that perhaps Balaam just needed a little more incentive. He sent a more prestigious group of officials, men of higher status and influence, and offered even greater rewards. This time, Balaam hesitated. Here's where we see Balaam's internal conflict. He knew what God had said, but he also saw an opportunity for wealth and honor. So, instead of standing firm in God's command, Balaam decided to ask God again. He was hoping, perhaps, that God might change his mind. After all, the rewards were pretty tempting. This brings us to an important lesson. How often do we, like Balaam, try to negotiate with God? We know His will, but we keep asking, hoping for a different answer that aligns with what we want. Balaam's desire for material gain led him to push boundaries that should have been respected. Part 3, the journey begins. A divided heart on the road. God's reluctant permission. God allowed Balaam to go with the officials, but with one clear condition: Balaam was to only speak the words that God would give him. Balaam's heart, however, was still divided. He wanted to obey God, but he also wanted the rewards that Balak promised. And so, Balaam set out on his journey, riding his trusted donkey and accompanied by the officials from Moab. The stage was set for one of the most unusual and memorable encounters in the Bible. Part 4, the talking donkey. God's unexpected messenger. A divine roadblock. As Balaam and his entourage traveled, something remarkable happened. The angel of the Lord stood in the path ahead, sword drawn, ready to stop Balaam. However, Balaam couldn't see the angel. He was spiritually blind to the divine intervention happening right in front of him. But Balaam's donkey saw the angel. The Bible says, "And the ass saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, and his sword drawn in his hand, and the ass turned aside out of the way, and went into the field." Numbers chapter 22 verse 23. Imagine this scene for a moment. Balaam, the renowned prophet, riding along with important officials, suddenly finds his donkey veering off the road into a field. Embarrassed and frustrated, Balaam struck the donkey to get it back on the road. The angel appeared again, this time in a narrow path between two vineyard walls. The donkey, seeing the angel, pressed close to one of the walls, crushing Balaam's foot in the process. Balaam struck the donkey again. Finally, the angel of the Lord moved to a place so narrow that there was no way to turn. Seeing the angel, the donkey simply lay down under Balaam. And Balaam, in his frustration, struck the donkey a third time. The donkey speaks. And then something extraordinary happened. God opened the donkey's mouth, and it spoke, "What have I done unto thee, that thou hast smitten me these 3 times?" Numbers chapter 22 verse 28. Imagine Balaam's surprise. His donkey, a simple beast of burden, was talking to him. But what's even more surprising is Balaam's response. Instead of being shocked into silence, he argued with the donkey. He said, "Because thou hast mocked me, I would there were a sword in mine hand, for now would I kill thee." Numbers chapter 22 verse 29. The donkey replied, "Am I not thine ass, upon which thou hast ridden ever since I was thine unto this day? Was I ever wont to do so unto thee?" And Balaam had to admit, "Nay." Numbers chapter 22 verse 30. The angel's revelation. At that moment, God opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the path with a drawn sword. The angel said to Balaam, "Wherefore hast thou smitten thine ass these 3 times? Behold, I went out to withstand thee, because thy way is perverse before me." Numbers chapter 22 verse 32. Balaam realized that he had been on a dangerous path, one that was opposed to God's will. He bowed his head and fell flat on his face, acknowledging his error. The angel made it clear that Balaam could continue on his journey, but he was only to speak the words that God would give him. Part 5, Balaam's prophecies speaking God's blessings over Israel. Balak's expectations vs. God's will. When Balaam finally arrived in Moab, King Balak was ready to get down to business. He had spent time, effort, and money to bring Balaam here, and he expected results, specifically a curse on Israel. But Balaam warned Balak, "Lo, I am come unto thee, have I now any power at all to say anything? The word that God putteth in my mouth, that shall I speak." Numbers chapter 22 verse 38. Balaam knew that he could only speak what God allowed, and that his own desires were irrelevant compared to God's command. Balak took Balaam to 3 different locations, hoping that a change of scenery might lead to a different outcome. But each time, Balaam spoke not curses, but blessings over Israel. Instead of weakening Israel, Balaam's words affirmed their strength and favor in the eyes of God. One of the most significant moments came in Numbers chapter 24 verse 17, when Balaam prophesied, "There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel." This was a prophecy about the coming Messiah Jesus Christ. Even in a moment intended for Israel's harm, God turned it into a message of hope and salvation. Part 6, Key Lessons from Balaam's Story. 1. God can use anyone or anything to accomplish his purposes. One of the most striking aspects of this story is how God used Balaam's donkey, a humble, lowly animal, to accomplish his purpose. The donkey saw what Balaam could not, and God used it to save Balaam's life and redirect his path. This teaches us that God can use anyone or anything to get our attention. It may be through a friend, a stranger, or even a situation that frustrates us. Are we willing to listen when God uses the unexpected? 2. Spiritual blindness can affect even the spiritually mature. Balaam was a prophet, someone who had direct communication with God. Yet, he was spiritually blind to the danger in front of him. His desire for wealth and honor clouded his spiritual vision. Meanwhile, the donkey, an animal with no prophetic credentials, could see the angel of the Lord. This is a powerful reminder that no matter how spiritually mature we think we are, we can still miss God's guidance if our hearts are not fully aligned with Him. Balaam's story challenges us to examine our motives and ensure that we are not allowing personal ambition to cloud our spiritual judgment. 3. God's plans are sovereign. No one can override His blessings. Balak's plan was to have Balaam curse Israel, but God had already declared His blessing over them. Despite Balak's persistence, Balaam could only speak the words God put in his mouth. As Balaam himself said, "God is not a man, that he should lie, neither the Son of Man, that he should repent. Hath he said, and shall he not do it?" Numbers chapter 23 verse 19. This teaches us that God's blessings are sovereign. No one can override or undo what God has spoken over our lives. When God declares something, it stands. No amount of opposition can change His plans. 4. The danger of divided loyalties. Balaam's story is a cautionary tale about the danger of divided loyalties. Balaam wanted to serve God, but he also wanted the rewards that Balak offered. This divided heart led him down a dangerous path and nearly cost him his life. Jesus said, "No man can serve 2 masters," Matthew chapter 6 verse 24. Balaam's story reminds us of the importance of having an undivided heart, one that is fully committed to following God, no matter the cost. Part 7, Modern-day applications of Balaam's story. 1. Recognizing divine detours. Have you ever faced obstacles in your life and wondered why things weren't going as planned? Perhaps you were pursuing a particular career, relationship, or goal, and suddenly, everything seemed to come to a standstill. It's easy to become frustrated, just like Balaam did when his donkey refused to move forward. But what if that obstacle is actually a divine detour? What if God is trying to redirect you, protect you, or teach you something in the process? Balaam's donkey was not being stubborn for the sake of it. God was using the donkey to protect Balaam from a dangerous path. In our own lives, we need to recognize that sometimes the donkeys that block our way are actually God's instruments of grace, leading us away from harm. 2. Don't let greed or ambition cloud your judgment. Balaam's desire for Balak's rewards clouded his spiritual discernment. He knew God's will, yet he kept asking, hoping for a different answer that aligned with his own desires. How often do we find ourselves in a similar situation, tempted to compromise our values for success, recognition, or financial gain? Balaam's story is a warning against divided loyalty. We cannot serve both God and money. We must decide whom we will serve and make that commitment wholeheartedly. A divided heart leads to spiritual blindness and puts us on a dangerous path. 3. True strength lies in submission to God. Balaam eventually learned that true strength lies in submission to God. Despite the temptation of riches and honor, he had no power to curse what God had blessed. He could only speak the words that God gave him. This shows us that true spiritual authority comes not from our own strength or ambition, but from our submission to God's will. In a world that values independence and self-promotion, Balaam's story reminds us that there is greater power in obedience and submission to God than in pursuing our own agendas. The most effective way to impact the world is not by seeking our own glory, but by aligning ourselves with God's purposes. Conclusion: a talking donkey and the voice of God. The story of Balaam and his talking donkey is not just an amusing anecdote from the Old Testament, it's a profound reminder of God's sovereignty, patience, and love. It challenges us to listen more closely, to check our motives, and to submit our plans to God. If God can use a donkey to speak truth, imagine what He can do through each of us if we are willing to listen and obey. The next time you find yourself facing an obstacle, instead of getting frustrated, take a moment to ask, God, what are you trying to show me? If you found this message insightful, share it with your friends and family. Don't forget to like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to SanLivelySocial for more inspiring and thought-provoking stories from the Bible. Together, let's grow in faith and understanding, one story at a time.